You and I are predetermined nonsense, and that's okay. You and I have predetermined consequence, and that's okay. And that's okay. You and I are locked into our destiny, and that's okay. And that's okay. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know what you want. Look out. You gotta know what you want. Look out. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know what you want. Our predetermined nonsense have predetermined consequence. You and that's okay. You and predetermined nonsense. Look out. And that's okay. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know it. You and I are locked into our destiny, and that's okay. And that's okay.
Need to be able to have conversations without feeling like we're going to say something that gets us thrown in jail because people happen to be offended.
Do you know what you believe?
All right, dudes, we are live with another Pangburn Hangout. I'm a bit early coming on today. Eliyahu will be joining us in about 6 minutes. I got to make sure I'm in the right channel on Discord. Hope you're all doing well. It looks like the world is recovering. It's going to be terrific. The pandemic is recovering. Keep your hopes up, folks. Vaccine's doing its work. And, you know, on a more unfortunate note, the COVID-19 is it's kind of killed off a lot of the vulnerable too. So we're going to start seeing a lot of improvements on the amount of people dying. It sucks to say, but you know, that's also the result of us seeing a lot of dips in a lot of countries in deaths. I just want to make sure. Okay, I was going to go to this voice channel. If you guys want to join us for this discussion, we're going to be talking about consent today. Consent, what is it? I didn't consent to that. That's what they all say. But we're going to be having a conversation about it today. Eliyahu, who is one of our Pangburn philosophers and Pangburn skeptics, is going to be running the discussion. For these hangouts, I like to do as little talking as possible and as much learning as possible. So sometimes I get carried away and jump into the conversation, but I want to hear from you guys and hear your ideas. That's what this Pangburn Hangout is for. And if you want to absolutely destroy me in chess, because I'm a noob, let's fucking do it. I'm in. I'm here. Ken Patton, how's it going? Alexander MB, welcome. Alexander MB, the newly appointed Pangburn psychology advisor, practicing therapist. So happy to have Alexander as part of the team. If you guys want to get involved with anything we do at Pangburn, or you want to help out, or you see a place where Pangburn could really improve, send me a note, admin@pang-burn.com, and yeah, talk to me or send me a DM through any places where you find me. I'll usually get back to you pretty quickly. Twitter's good, Discord's great, but yeah, bare minimum, join us on Discord. QQ-5 says Fritz chess. I don't know what that is. That's how big of a noob I am. Got to use the engine under the table. Yeah, I got to use. I got to flip on that genius switch bot that I have. I'm on a bit of a roll right now, so I'm feeling kind of cocky. But I'll try not to let that get out of hand. I still haven't logged into the voice room. Here we go. I'm logged in. So Eliyahu and others will join us in a bit here. Anyone who wants to join the conversation, just come into Discord. If you're not familiar with Discord, very easy. Log in, join the Pangburn Discord. You can see the address on top, and Alexander dropped it in there for you guys, the link. Thank you for that. And yeah, join us. And Discord is really easy to use. Even if you just have your phone, you don't need fancy computer and anything. You just basically it you know, connect to some Wi-Fi and just connect with your voice. And sometimes we do voice and video. If you want to support the Pangburn cause, you can go to pang-burn.com/subscription and become an official Pangburn subscriber. Did I just lose that whole window? No, I didn't. I just minimized it. You're minimizing consent. We're talking about consent today, by the way. But yes, pang-burn.com/subscription. You get a seat. You better be casting every couple days, Trav. Yeah, I know. We'll get back on schedule. I am doing some philosophical coaching now. As kind of a sidebar for myself and for the company. So, and I'm amazed. I'm like, who would want to talk to me about anything to do with that? But I already have 6-7 clients. So, if you're interested in having me do any philosophical coaching for you in your life or for your businesses or anything like that, basically all it is us just having deep conversations and analyzing from a philosophical perspective everything that's going on in your life, and you know, trying to identify some things that, you know, maybe there's some wiggle room for some change in your philosophy for your business, and maybe not. Maybe you have a perfect ideas, and I may not add much, and that's why maybe those sessions will only last one session. But yeah, they're going really good so far, and it's all confidential. Calahu V. DeSantis says, who's the Pangburn psychologist? So Alexander MB is our Pangburn psychology advisor. So I'm appointing these advisors to the company that are going to basically advise Pangburn in areas of their expertise. So if you're interested in being an advisor, and we will be having monthly advisor meetings where we'll look at what's going on in the world, some interesting content we could maybe write to talk about a certain element in the war of ideas, a topic that needs to be discussed. So that's all going down. If you want to get more involved, getting hooked up with us on Discord, hooking up, full consent on Discord is a good idea. Eliyahu, how's it going, my brother?
Hello there, Mr. Pangburn.
How's tricks?
How's tricks? They're for kids.
It reminds me of a joke we used to say that's very anti-gay when we were young, but I won't regurgitate it on YouTube because I'm already in YouTube's shitbox. So.
Oh yeah. I ask if you got monetization back.
No, we're approaching 7 months in waiting for just the first basic review. And if anyone wants to go to my Twitter, you can see YouTube's responses like, well, we hope you get a review soon, as though it's like not YouTube doing the review. So I'm like, who's running this company? and then they're like, we don't know. We don't have a schedule of when everyone's going to get their review. And I'm like, can you make one? So far, no response, but I would think YouTube has the resources to treat their content creators with enough respect and care that they could make a schedule so that they could say, okay, Pangburn, your dirty review is coming up in 2 weeks. You better fucking get your channel up to snuff. Because so far I don't know what happened, right? I have one strike officially on the channel, and it's supposed to be a 3-strike shutdown thing, but all of a sudden, it seemingly out of nowhere, I open up my YouTube in the morning one day, and they're like, your channel is no longer available for monetization. You can apply for a review in a month. And meanwhile, I'm like, holy fuck, no revenue for a fucking month? I'm gonna die if I don't get this back up. And then right in it, you had to wait a month before you could apply. And right when that month comes up, I was waiting. I hit that review button. And since I hit that review button, we're almost on 7 months. And I mean, it's not like YouTube hasn't made a lot of money off the content I've brought to YouTube. So, and they obviously, I can expect some delays, but what I've read is that you can expect it to take up to a month to get a review. I'm like, okay, up to a month. Okay, I can eat a lot of spaghetti and Mr. Noodle in that time. But we're approaching 7 months here. I've had to get creative.
Well, I was going to say you're probably pretty resourceful.
Oh man, I think, for people who are building businesses, like the Pangburn brand's about 4 years old, and if you talk to a lot of people who have built businesses, like it's a very long time before they're even lucky enough to turn a profit, where they're not like, hustling side jobs and things like that, and like literally, yes, eating out of the can for a very long time. And I'm happy to do that, man. I like being in that survival mode. It's an exciting adventure for me. And I know a lot of people might find a lot of anxiety in something like that, where they're like, oh my God, lack of security. And I also should say, I I have the advantage when it comes to a security thing of not having children or being married or anything like that. I don't have any dependents, so
Right, yeah.
I can
So
I can be an absolute slave to my business.
yeah, it's very theatrical of you
Dude,
to want that starving artist kind of
as much as I want
starving
to,
philosopher.
yeah, as much as I want to move away from being like the dirty, unwashed Shakespearean guy eating out of a can in his little like dome, I just, that's like where I want to live.
Fair.
Yeah, but you know, it's all good.
Yeah. So this topic of consent. So the reason why. So this is interesting to me. I was talking about it a lot with somebody yesterday and the day before that, and I think that this is kind of my bedrock for my moral foundation. I've talked about this, I think, on your server before too,
Yeah,
because
I remember.
we have all this discussion about what rules should we follow? Is religion the best place to teach us ethics? Is it utilitarianism? Is it deontology? And I think that you can get pretty far with consent, just like try to minimize violating other people's consent as much as possible.
Yeah, have you come across any obviously most moral system, all moral systems as far as I'm concerned, are going to have hypotheticals and issues where it's just going to come down to taste. Have you identified any of those?
Yes. So the exceptions are where you can violate consent, but you have to be reasonably certain that the person involved would want you to violate their consent if they had all the facts. So, obvious example is if somebody's walking out, if your friend walks out into the street and they're about to get hit by a car, and you know that they wouldn't want to die, they don't want to get hit by that car, and you yank them and you pull them back.
Right.
You violated their consent because they didn't say that you could touch them and throw them back onto the sidewalk, but you know that that's what they would have wanted.
You are also seeking to maximize their well-being.
Yes.
You don't know that's what they would have wanted. You're assuming that's what they would have wanted.
Yes, that's true.
So let's not pretend that you know. Let's just admit that we assume.
Fair.
Well, when we say well, I think it's it's true that we.
What if they're trying to kill themselves?
We have to operate on some presuppositions, right, Bruce? Like,
of course we do.
Yeah, like things like life is generally preferable to death.
Yeah, that's right. Why that is? It's a good is the presupposition. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, anyone who has a moral foundation must admit that you got to start off with some of these, and a lot of people like to tap dance around like. Let's say I hear this a lot in the well-being spectrum. A lot of people who are terrible at communicating this, they haven't identified what those presuppositions are. And even if it's just a few, you need to understand what those are, because when a lot of religious people come to you and be like, "What's your axiomatic whatever?" That they want to know why you care about living, and then basically the argument is, well, I have this presupposition because I like it. That's all it is.
Well, the real reason why they want to know that is because when somebody comes to them with something that is arguably ridiculous, someone has to have a foundation or some objective reason to why I could say that's ridiculous. And when somebody says, well, I have no authority but my own, then that person is attempting to impose what they think is correct onto me with no objective agreed upon authority. That's where the rubber meets the road on that conversation. It's anticipating improper use of force.
Bruce, could you say that last thing you said, when you said that's where the rubber meets the road?
It is anticipating. Okay. The rubber meets the road when somebody is asking you to do something when you don't have an agreed upon objective, and their only agreed upon objective is that which comes from their own autonomous reasoning. So then I am subjected to their own autonomous reasoning without some objective standard. So when it comes to enforcing what they consider to be objectively correct under their own autonomous reasoning, then I have to then yield to them because of their own fallacious reasoning.
See, don't you see what you're? I feel like this is an excuse for you to shoehorn God in as an
I'm
objective
not
standard.
shoehorning anything. I'm just saying I'm not going to accept somebody's subjective moral stances on me because they feel like it.
So
I'm saying what I'm doing is I'm like
Bruce,
trying
would you
to
say that?
anticipate what I'm anticipating where the rubber meets the road for most people when they get into those issues. If that makes sense. It's not just that why do you believe what you believe? Like that's just like an entry level. That's a surface level question as to why do you think you can tell me to do something? That's the real reason.
Now, would you think that someone telling you something is a violation of your consent in any way?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to overtake the conversation here. Sorry.
No,
it's fine.
I think it's interesting.
What do you mean by violate? By telling me something?
Well, yeah, there's this idea out there that I did not consent to hear that.
Oh, the hearing something is, I would say, silliness.
Or your sense, I didn't consent to see that. That's another one. Because someone might put up like a billboard that says, God hates fags. And then they'll say, I didn't consent to see that. It hurt me because I'm for whatever reason.
Well, we'd have to then come to some understanding of what hurt is.
Sure.
So
I think we can even measure it.
The very idea that somebody is harmed by an image or speech is a tough case to make. That it actually and also there's a case to be made that in order to grow, you must be uncomfortable with something that you hear or see or experience in some ways.
I think the strongest case is something like libel and reputation destruction.
Yeah.
I like the idea of, sorry, hi, Michael here.
Libel?
I was going to say, I think this goes back to Eliyahu's point earlier, which is it's consent on your best ability where you think it's necessary, right? Like it's one thing to show like shock and horror just because you want to offend someone versus like, you need to see this because it's going to change, like fundamentally you need this for your life to survive. Like here's the cure to cancer, right? Like, and you can't say, I don't consent to know that because as Eliyahu said, consent can sometimes be broken if your best intentions, given if they knew the facts, they would want to see or hear that.
Yeah, but even that's an assumption.
I mean, yeah, but I think that what I'm saying
There's
is
no axiom there besides your own fallacious reasoning.
The axiom is that we can break consent if to our best of our ability of understanding. Obviously, we're at the end of we're humans with limited, understanding.
Yeah, but what does best of ability mean? See, once again, you're creating some subjective standard.
I don't think that's subjective to say, like, given your knowledge base level and your ability to reason, whether or not your reasoning, like, here's the thing, people can come to different conclusions. As long as you have foundational reasoning and logic, you still have some form of reasoning. And as long as your reasoning is consistent, that's all that really matters to me. And I think that's not subjective.
Wait a second. There's consistent reasoning to think the Jews were the problem in Germany. There's reasoning there.
Sure.
But there's an ought that we uphold that's wrong.
Yeah.
But there is a reason to blame them for their crimes, or at least what was considered to be egregious acts in finance. So let's not pretend now that we have figured out how that works.
And I'm
It's not
with
that
you.
long, not that long ago that we're also doing that with Japanese in the United States, Muslims. Like there's a ton of problems with that line of reasoning is all I would say.
Yeah. And generally, I agree with you. Generally, I am probably a lot more skeptical than Michael about when we know what's best for other people.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, even if I think that you and our moral standards overlap a lot. It's just that
I just recognize the presupposition and you don't.
Right, but so does that really matter? If
Yeah.
we a lot of the same overlapping values and we're going to agree in most of these emergency situations about what to do, you've just derived it, I think, from a different presupposition than I have.
Well, I think the problem is like when you start making claims or about what should happen to other people, you have to come to some agreement as to where you're deriving these claims and why this has justification, as opposed to just my own reasoning.
I guess I just think,
But practically speaking, you are correct, because I'm not making a claim that people aren't acting rationally, or people aren't compassionate, or people aren't smart, people aren't mostly trying to do the right thing. I'm not making that claim. But I would make the claim that, like, when somebody decides to wield power for the sake of what they would consider to be goodness or well-being, whatever the case might be, it's only through it's either mob rule or their own autonomous fallacious reasoning.
I mean, if you're
Which
going to
is
make me
fundamental
defend
problems.
this point, I will defend the point, which is I think you're kind of taking this very extreme point, but I'll defend an extreme point. And just as Sam Harris would say, take your philosophy to the extreme to really test it out. Which is, yeah, if someone rationally believes that like the truth is like insert person is wrong and we should do insert bad, objectively, or I can't say objectively right now because that's what we're debating, but like what we generally consider in a modern civilization as bad, we can say that's wrong. But if someone reasonably with logic comes to that conclusion, I would argue there's justifiability in their actions. I would just say that I don't believe, and again, I'm down to be proven, but I don't believe there's a person really in history who committed atrocities who genuinely believed I am doing the right logical thing, as opposed to this is the means to an end. And that's my argument, preposition I'm making, is that you can say that I'm justifying this because I think the Jews suck or whatever, right? But I don't think truly Hitler believed that. I think Hitler, for example, knew that there was the way to rise to power. Nazis knew to scapegoat people. It's not like they were the leaders who propagized like the idea didn't rationally believe that. They didn't have a logical conclusion because that's not a logical conclusion.
Well, one thing about Hitler is there's a lot of illogic there if you look at it from a standpoint of him wanting some kind of longevity to what he was doing. It seems very clear based on the evidence available that especially when you see places where he could have backpedaled a little bit to which from a war perspective would have been a really good strategy, but instead the focus was ushering in the quicker methods of killing more Jews, like maximizing that killing.
I mean, there's some really good arguments that I can't make well right now. They're better people, and if I can find links to them, I'll find them. But that basically talk about how fascism inherently is illogical. It's a system that can't survive, right? It's designed to fail from the start because it is a consolidation of power that you need a huge mass of people to rise to the top, but then you basically need to consolidate the power into one. So it's basically a contradiction on itself. So argumentally speaking, even from the base level, Hitler was wrong, not rational, right? So that's why he is wrong, not because, obviously for a lot of reasons he was wrong, but also because he wasn't a rational being. I think going back to what started from Eliyahu's is the only way to violate consent is you have to have a reasonable, logical, and rational reason that you think a reasonable, logical, rational person would be, given all the facts, would break you would do the same.
Yeah, so I think where Michael and I would disagree is the level at which this can be done. I think that this can be done on a personal level. The example that I gave, where you pull your friend back that's about to get hit by a car, because I know him, I know who he was yesterday, I know what he does for a living, I know who his mother is, and all this kind of stuff, and so I feel comfortable in making that judgment. I don't feel comfortable in making the judgment on a societal level. So this is where me and Bruce probably agree. I don't like this idea of thinking that I know what's best for somebody in Canada or knowing what's best for somebody in the other side of the country.
Yeah, it's because as things scale, the hierarchies get more disparity in the hierarchy, and there's less. You have less authority over a person's decisions because you're not aware of the circumstances or context of that person, and so very difficult to make such broad strokes. And so what happens is you make broad strokes, you get broad results, and broad results will just minimize people to the lowest common denominator, which is okay if you're after something like that.
That's just a failure of like information. Like if you had what we
But
seem
there's
to
a
be
failure
arguing
of
with,
intellect.
well, arguably, like again, arguably, if you have a truly rational, let's say you have an AI, right? This is like Isaac Asimov's perfect future, right? We have the AI controlling the government, right? And it has perfect information. Could we arguably say that machine could make the right decisions for everyone if it had all the information? Would we trust that AI to make the right decisions for everyone?
I mean, that
No,
AI sounds like it would be indistinguishable from God.
kind of does, yeah.
So are we saying that a rational entity, logical entity that has all information is that is the precipice of like that is the only level we need to define God in this
Well, the
context.
problem is, what does rational mean? Like, how do you come to what's rational? By your own autonomous reasoning? So what we think is rational might be different.
Well, I test it, right? Using my senses.
Even that's, but your senses are very subjected to being deceived.
Also,
What other
stops
mechanism do I have?
what stops the AI being from glitching or being wrong?
Well, you have to assume that it doesn't.
We're
That's-
assuming like well that's what we're talking about right now. What's the logic right here, right? And I think this is where we have to start from the basic axiom of like mathematical logic. And I'm a pretty big proponent of mathematics and decision making, right? I think game theory and mathematics provide us good foundations where some objectivity in a sort of, as I agree with you, Bruce, that like our senses and our reality are shaped by our what we perceive to be reality. But I think logic and mathematics is consistent person to person.
And that's something
Logic,
that's
logic and mathematics is.
it's not,
Oh, good.
not dependent on your senses, right?
Well, logic and mathematics isn't necessarily dependent on your senses, but what you derive from those are. See, just because people come to a poor conclusion doesn't necessarily mean the context or the foundation what they're using are wrong. Just because somebody bastardizes a text or a scientific proof doesn't mean the text or the proof itself is bad. So they could all come to the same. They could all use the same sort of logic and have sound logic, but their rationality or their conclusions are not necessarily based upon the same standards across the board. So they would have their own sense of what to do with that information. And so then we have to have some arbiter of what to do with the logic.
But
Okay.
you don't like any arbiters, don't you? Right?
It depends on it depends on what you mean.
Bruce's only one and only arbiter is AOC.
It's true. You got me on that one. She's yeah. She,
Okay, yeah, we could talk about different.
she sets the standard.
It's me. Well, we could talk about arbiters in different contexts, right? So I don't think I'm saying anything that you wouldn't feel comfortable saying. I think you've said this before in the public voice chat.
Yeah, okay.
You're fine with being the arbiter of decisions within your own household.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Now, why do you think that you have the ability to be the arbiter in your own household?
I have ultimate responsibility over the decisions that I make because I'm accountable to myself in that. Accountable to God and for my own responsibilities. I'm not going to hold other people accountable to my own decisions.
But it's not just you, right? You're also it's also the other people that live with you.
Oh, the household is the individual.
Oh, I thought when you would say household, I thought you meant of.
Well, no, I'm saying like the household is the collective. The people in the home are making decisions for them because they have fundamentally told me to do so. Like that's an axiom that already exists. That's not something I've had to manifest myself or create. It's just something that is a part of being.
Have you just described a republic in your own house, right? Like you've elected
That's correct.
representatives. So
I mean, the representation is elected by the authority of God. But yes.
Well, I mean, arguably, then, do we say that
Because hierarchies don't scale that way.
why not, right? Like, why can't we scale?
Because they don't.
You represent your household, and we represent the community. Then that community represents a person, which then represents
For this,
a township, which represents a
yeah.
city.
For the
And now
same
we have
reason that, for the
democracy,
same
right?
reason, Eliyahu said he did not want to tell someone in Canada what is correct, because that doesn't scale. It's too far, not enough context. There's a number of reasons there. That's why.
But wouldn't Canada have its own representation in I guess, the UN equivalent of this system?
Why would they have? Well, there's a reason why right now, there's a reason why at least the United States is set up, or a republic is set up in such a way that they have representation from smaller entities that go forward.
I mean,
But
isn't
the
the
ultimate
problem that there's
say-
not true equal representation? Like, if there was objectively true, like each one individual had the same exact representation scaling up, that at no point does anyone one voice not have in some equal capacity context
Yep.
representation as the
And
arbiter at the end.
You've hit the nail on the head as to why government's difficult.
I mean, no one's arguing that government's easy. I think we're just arguing like consent at this point. I think if we can create a system of consent that stems from basically as we can scale it up by having representations from microcosm, but it can only work if we have equal representation, because it's not true consent if someone has more consent abilities than someone else, right? Someone's more equal than someone else.
You were
Well,
talking
you can if you agree to it. But yeah.
earlier about failure of information. It seems that so much is going to get lost on the way up, though.
Yeah. You're also going to govern based on the lowest common denominator. And it leaves everyone else to suffer the consequences. Or you could have people make individual choice among themselves, in their homes, in their individual nature, without having to use force.
I mean, this is a recursive problem, though, right? Like, you're just talking. I mean, scale. Arguably, we can then scale this down. Like, we've just arbitrarily decided that 3 people is small enough to have all the information, right? But like, that's just an arbitrary decision you also made. Like, why
I'm
is
not
it
arbitrarily making it? See, that's the difference here. I have an objective standard as a household. You do not. You think it's arbitrary. I do not. And when the society has the same objective standard where they don't believe it's arbitrary, we can then work forward.
But if I can just make the same argument that humanity is my household and that all people as a species,
you can
is
make
my
that
household.
argument if you want, but you have no objective standard to make that.
I do. We're a species. We're literally the same.
No, that's not enough.
Species.
That doesn't work, because if that's the case, everyone would have to agree with you.
I mean, I think genetically speaking, we all do, right? That's why we can breed with each other. We're the same species. You can't disagree that we're the same species.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you're making a statement about what is arbitrary versus what is objective. And the standard by which I would rule my household or my community, or whatever you wanted to call it, is an objective standard. It's not arbitrary. But because you don't have an objective standard, you see it as arbitrary. Thus, we cannot have an amicable relationship. Or very difficult for us to have trade or intellectual discussion or any other governing scenario, because we were coming from 2 different locations. So we'd have to take each individual instance and evaluate it against our own objective worldview and try and come to some agreement, or we would divorce, you and I.
Metalworks, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say that we biologically form tribes. Like, that's something that's a part of our nature. And we can only have so many people. We only know so many people. We can only remember so many people. I have so many relationships. We work better when our communities are a little smaller. That doesn't mean we can't have these bigger communities, but they have their limits. They can only be strained so far. That's why we still have like families and households. Otherwise, we'd be in big communes, and we're not.
Well, that's what some people want. But you're right. It's a fair point.
And whenever it happens, it doesn't completely work out. Unless the people really know each other. Unless they really know each other really well.
Well, their family is what they are.
Basically, a very big one.
But we're back to the sort of question of information and just limited human knowledge. Like, I'm saying, imagine the future where we evolve to the point at which we can know more, understand more, have more information. And you can see historically, tribes used to be like 2 people and now we have
They were never
communities
just
of
two people.
No, they were small
Okay.
groups.
Small
There
groups,
were
sure,
tons
but
of people. The average number of children in a household that turned into the century was 10. The first child to be born in a hospital, sorry, the first president to be born in a hospital was JFK. So before that, we had dozens, gaggles of children were had in these tribes.
right.
There
But
was
again,
there was also a gaggle of infant mortality, I will say.
right.
Even
But,
so.
Yeah,
I mean, the
and a
point
gaggle
still-
of female mortality too. There was a lot of there was.
Well,
most,
yeah, a gaggle of men dying at the hands of other men in stupid wars. It's true. There's been suffering all throughout. But what I'm saying is
Yeah,
they
but
weren't
that's
two people in a
wars.
small
I'm
tribe.
talking about childbirth, and so please don't move it from one to the other. Childbirth is what you need to do to have children. You have to give childbirth, right?
I'm saying these weren't small tribes. These are people having lots of children.
Yeah, and they weren't living, as pointed out to you. That's why they were having lots
Yeah.
of children, not because we love living with loads of people, but because they weren't living. That's the difference.
Who wasn't living? What is it? What I don't understand.
The children.
According to what standard?
What
Today?
children? I don't.
They didn't have an iPhone, I know, but what are you talking about? People lived. I don't
I think what
understand.
she's trying to say, the reason why there was so much infant mortality is because there wasn't the sizes weren't advanced enough to handle them. That's why they had so many kids. Is that what
No,
you're saying?
That's not at all.
I
what
don't
I'm
think
saying.
that's
I'm
the-
saying, I'm
I
just
don't get
talking
it.
Facts in 1900, when people were having gaggles of kids.
That's
Infant
correct.
mortality rate was 165 per 1,000 in 1900.
Yeah.
And it was the number one reason that women died.
Oh, because they
Okay.
had too many
What,
children.
this is a sideways argument of Michael was saying that we had small tribes of two people.
Okay, two people. I was being okay. The point is, we had smaller tribes before, and I think we have bigger tribes now. I don't think that's a. I hope
think
that's not a
it's being
contentious
hyperbolic.
point. That there are bigger tribes today than there were yesterday.
I think
Yesterday,
there's
Well,
an
like I
attempt.
said,
There's
those
an
tribes
attempt at
have
them,
limits.
but
What's
there's
that?
some limitation. Yeah,
but
there's a
Metalwork
limit
was
of the
saying
number of
something.
people.
Sorry, I just couldn't hear what Metalwork said. What's up?
I'm just saying those tribes have their limit because you watch them, they try to curate them, they try to get people out that aren't, pure enough for
Right,
the tribe.
but do we agree
We do
that,
that now.
before there were less people in tribes and now there's more people in tribes? All I'm arguing is that maybe there's a limit now, but does that limit increase in the future? Do tribes get bigger and bigger
Unless
as
we
we
can
get
evolve, no.
right? But we do. We have evolved. This is like
Well, the only way
humans
that it's
today
occurred is
versus
through
humans
technology.
1,000 years ago.
If
Are,
we can,
even in like
manipulate it,
brain capacity, in terms of intelligence, the
Yeah.
smartest person 2,000 years ago is probably dumber than the average dumb person today, right? Like that's just, we are smarter as people in terms of intelligence that we have.
Depends on how you measure
Isaac
intelligence.
Newton's probably
Yeah.
not dumber than I don't know how dumb Isaac Newton is, but I think we have evolved. But Bruce is right. Technology has evolved more than we have. So psychologists have been saying, when it comes to something like Facebook friends, our tribe is kind of capped at around 500 or 250, those sort of numbers, rather than
Yeah.
the 7 million friends.
1,500.
We can't do those big. Our village number is 250 to 500.
We can see with the groups of people that have tried the most diligently to try to foster this community. We can look at Christianity and we can look at Islam, two things that are bound by one book that have tried very hard to create one human world, and they fracture. As soon as you get a certain number of
Yep.
people, they're just going to fracture into different denominations. And people like to say Islam doesn't do this, but oh yes, it does. It just fractures into
All of them
different.
do. They're never going to be perfect. You're never going to have, unless you can actually evolve, change how human behavior, change human behavior on a genetic level. You're always going to have people forming smaller tribes because nothing will ever be perfect. We're always purity testing, purity spiraling. We're always trying to find an excuse to separate people from one another. We're always
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
categorize each other. We're
Yeah,
always
and
trying to
when you do
discriminate
that,
against each other.
when you do that, and you'll have dissidents, and they'll have to be dealt with by some centralized authority that's attempting to create a large tribe for its control. And so those who band together because it's going to happen naturally are going to be seen as dissidents and dealt with.
Again, I'm not arguing today, right? And I think we're all saying the same thing, but just somehow like missing each other's point, right? Like today, that number is, let's say, 500. I think someone said that, and I'm just going to accept that as a fact that 500 is our limit. But I think we could accept that 2,000 years ago, no one knew 500 people, right? That was impossible. That maybe 50 was the maximum, right? So I think it's just a limitation of our brains, and this is true. Like humans are really bad at predicting the future. That I'm just making the positing that it's a limitation of knowledge. We just can't absorb that much knowledge, but we clearly know more. And an individual brain, even compared to Isaac Newton, the amount of information the average person knows, say, would make Isaac Newton blow. Technology
no,
and
here's
humanity is
here's another
merging
thing.
together, whatever, right?
You don't want people to care that much about that many people, because the more people you care about, the more you're going to be, you'll feel bad about. I think there's a reason why we do that, because if you kept seeing like 1,000 people died in this earthquake in this other country somewhere, and if you actually, if that actually personally wounded you, and you had a hard time getting over it, like, you don't want that to be a thing to constantly happen. You want to be able to like ignore that and move on, because there's nothing you're gonna be able to do about that. It's just
there's always something we can do about everything. Maybe the problem is, I think you stumble on a great point, Metalworks, is maybe the problem that there is like arguably so much global suffering is that when you put things
there's
in
a
large
limit to how
numbers,
much empathy you can give out.
Right, but maybe that's again a limitation of humanity right now. But maybe in the future we can care about Again, I'm going back to the original point: is that maybe there's a future where humanity is my household, right? Humanity. I know enough about everyone. I know everyone's name. I know everything about everyone because we all know everything about everyone. We can absorb that knowledge, where that information stored, and then we create a society as a result of that, a society that we create for our own household, right?
And
the same way that. Yeah, go ahead.
And the only thing I see from happening resulting to that is, even if we ever get space travel, even if we can go from different planets, people are always going to find a reason to segregate from one another. You're going to have it happen. I'm not going to be surprised if like there's going to be there's going to be a Earth Mars civil war or some bullshit. It would not surprise me if that happened in the future. We're always going to want to segregate because there's always going to be a hard limit. Your brain is only so fucking big. There has to be a hard limit to how many relationships you can maintain.
Our brains can evolve. Our brains can store a lot of information. It's constantly our brains are exponentially growing.
You can do that is if you expand longevity and a whole bunch of other things. I just don't see it happening.
Metalworks, we've already done that. So you go back a couple of hundred years.
Oh, Ola, go ahead.
You go back a couple of hundred years ago and look up the average lifespan in your country. It was probably around 30 or 40, maybe 50.
Yeah.
It wasn't 70. And we expect now, if we hear someone died at 62, we're like, oh, that's young. But a couple of hundred years ago, it was 30.
I just want to see if there's a hard cap on this, because if there is...
We're going to keep expanding at Metalworks. It's a very strange thing to keep saying, we can't do this. Of course we can. We can keep expanding our brains. We can keep expanding our technology.
Can we though? I mean, nothing is infinite.
I would ask do we have to attack that which is not a good relationship? Or do you think we'll learn that you don't have to fight with the other person? Like,
we don't have to form relationships. If anything, what we should be focusing on is not so much having to grow like thousands of relationships. We could just be a little more trusting and caring of one another.
There is no way for people to come to agreements without having disagreements. There's no way for people to have relationships without some contentious disagreement. It's the same reason why perfection is boring, and we need character. Seeing character in somebody is accepting their flaws and all of the interesting things that make them important. So there is no utopia where people just get along, and that's just ridiculous. But there's going to be fight, there's going to be contention, and there's going to be stronger relationship out of the contention. Okay, what?
That was a joke.
Well, to bring it back to consent, I want to be able to give people the choice. So let these tribes grow as large as they can. I mean, I want to foster world unity as much as possible. If somebody does not want to be a part of that unity and prefers to live their life, as a hermit and go off and die, whatever
they won't live as a hermit, though.
That's what I'm saying. I want to be able to give them that ability to consent to or leave this social contract.
Can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. Do you think? I want to ask Elijah.
Yeah, I know. I was saying okay to Elijah.
Do you think people can be are just naturally nice, or do you think people are just like? Do you think they always want to be nice? Do you think people can't be? Do you not believe in bad people at all? Because that's what it sounds.
Nice is a weird one, right? Because and I come across this a lot in my life. People be like, well, some people who I used to be friends with, let's say in high school, they'll be like, "Oh, Travis isn't a very nice person," and I'll be like, I'll catch up with them. I'll be like, "Well, why'd you say I'm not a very nice person?" Well, you just like tell people exactly what you think about their idea if you think it's bad, and I'm like, "Well, yeah, but I don't think that's unkind or unnice to do that."
Let me try it this way: do you think do you think morally amoral people exist, like opportunistic scumbags? Because if you don't think opportunistic scumbags don't exist,
I think that those people exist, and I think it's one of the hardest moral questions to solve is what do you do with the people that suck and that can't
power hungry, opportunistic scumbags that can pretend to be nice and will abuse your system that wants to be globalized because you have good intentions.
Yeah.
They have intentions of power.
Metal. I actually think the answer, like based on my moral foundation, when you come across someone that's like that, I just think I approach people like that with care. I think they and caring for someone doesn't mean you're acknowledging or affirming their bad behavior, but I think it's better to look at people like that as a project, as a friendly project, as opposed to like trying to cast them away or like or kind of
I just don't want them to get power, man.
Look at
That's
no, man, you're right to not want that, of course.
That's the only thing I want to prevent.
But I think I
agree with you on everything else.
I think there's a caring way to go about that, and I think and I think the reason why we fundamentally put prisoners in prison, a lot of people don't understand it, and I think the reason why we do it is out of care, because they can't. But you can't care for them and allow them to be out in public where they are going to do harm to themselves and to others. Let's say in a situation where you're dealing with someone who causes harm.
Yeah.
And there's obviously many different versions of what harm is.
The point I'm just trying to make is like I care about things like due process because I just don't trust the government completely. You know, it could be wrong. I care about things. I care about having constitutions and structures in place to limit power because power is absolute. If you can't control it properly, opportunistic scumbags who get that power can really abuse it badly. And that's my worry. That's why I would prefer we try to maintain smaller subgroups that try to be nicer to each other than one globalizing group that tries to control one another or try to dictate how we all act.
The flip side of that is Metalworks. You and your posse decide we're going to make small tribes. Me and Yahoo said we're going to make a world tribe, and we're going to just dominate and take over because you have a small tribe that's like 10 people. And we have 1,000 army big. Like the problem is small tribes just don't realistically work, in a global society, right? Because at the end of the day, like unless every person tomorrow has a Tower of Babylon and we all split up into 10, groups of 10. Your group of 10 is never going to survive, right? Versus a global system.
What about the tribes that survive right now?
Isn't that demonstrably false? Completely? Like there are plenty of people that live outside of the global economy.
Yeah, there are people that live in the jungle and shit and in tribes. They survive just fine.
Not plenty.
Well, hold on. There's an important point to be made here. So if you're talking about indigenous tribes, like the very few uncontacted people that are still like hunter-gatherers, they exist because those governments have made a decision that they're going to be protected at all costs.
Yeah. Good.
Right. They've been afforded the opportunity to bow out of they've been given the consent that you're requesting, Eliyahu.
Right, but if Metalworks is saying, I want to make a small tribe because I'm afraid of power, right? But like if you're like afraid of power, that's not you making a small tribe is not going to stop the big power.
I said a subgroup, a sub-tribe.
Sure. The subgroup
that's
is not
that's why I like having states. The states are subgroups.
So why wouldn't you be okay with an overarching government that's only in charge of inter-country commerce and that's it? Because there's no such thing as global defense. So the only thing is managing financial disputes between countries.
Yeah, well, that's the argument for minarchism or limited government, which is the government exists to...
The same way that we treat states and treat states the same way we like...
It's the same argument made for minarchism.
Everyone against adding one more layer than the layer that we've added.
I ask a question here because I keep hearing this word government.
Breaking up, Aaron.
What's becoming clear to me, especially when you bring
We're losing you, brother.
You're on the road.
yeah, of course, we are still a tribalist, animalistic species. We are animals, no matter how much you don't want to believe that. But what I've noticed is that over the last 2,000-3,000 years, maybe even less than that, we've been clearly trying to break away from our more animalistic instinct and embrace our more social instinct of sort of, living together peacefully amongst each other to the best of our ability. That's why we put people in jail who don't conform to a more peaceful society. So we're clearly trying, who knows whether it's conscious or not, my best guess, probably not. We're clearly trying to break away from our animalistic instinct. I keep hearing this word government. It's pretty clear to me that a lot of mammals, there's definitely a hierarchy trained into our DNA. Why aren't we trying to break out of that?
It's very difficult. I mean,
I don't think that there's hierarchy ingrained in our DNA. I think hierarchy is ingrained in systematic use of mass scale. I don't think you can do anything without a director at the top and some pyramidic type fashion.
We've tried it because we're so used to having somebody be in charge. I know it's a wacky idea, but I think it's only a wacky idea because we legitimately do not think human beings.
You keep cutting out, man.
Yeah,
I don't think God wants us to hear the message.
Oh God.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. And to get onto the idea of consent. Look,
we didn't get what you said because you broke up way too much.
I don't.
Shit. We're missing it.
Bad idea.
I'm just gonna quickly answer Metalworks' point, which is interesting. Sorry, Aaron, I couldn't hear. I kind of heard parts, but I agree that we're sort of animals at some base point, and we have to fight to be better than that. But like your point about states, even that doesn't work, right? Arguably, most of our laws are what California and Texas decide. Like our emission standards on cars is because California says this is the emission standard, right? And they're the bigger tribe of the United States because they're the biggest economy, that in Texas and the United States, and so they determine the emission standards in America, right? Texas controls our.
We don't have the same emission standards where I live as Texas does.
The cars created an emission standard at the manufacturer level that meets all states, so that they don't have to make six different cars.
Right, and
that's what he's talking about.
That's because of manufacturing. And
right, but that's because, California, right, but
number of people are there.
Well, I'm not talking about people. I mean, technically, it is part of the reason that California's economy is so big is people. But we're talking in terms of number of people. That's a proxy for power. California has more power in terms of influencing car manufacturers for emission standards, right? So even fracturing into states doesn't work.
Amount of power.
Not really, right? Arguably, if Texas wants a lower emission standard, they can't do that, right?
Oh wait,
but the companies are going to go to the most stringent rules possible. That way, they're less likely to fall into a lawsuit. So any state that makes it more strict is going to have the same amount of power because every car company is going to start following them. So I'm just saying that particular example is a faulty one because that's a result of manufacturing process and not of political power.
Is economic and political power any different? Oh, sorry, Aaron, go ahead. I can hear you now.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you guys could hear me.
That's a lot better. That's a lot better.
Seems better. Mm-hmm.
You sound a lot better too. So.
Well, thank you. You want to grab a coffee sometime or what?
I'm a truck driver in America and you're in Canada. That is not physically possible.
Well, you got a truck. Drive it up there.
Drive it up here, man. We'll meet at a truck stop.
My truck. So, just before you guys continue your point, because of course I'm always late to this shit. Travis, when you label this consent, Are we talking like just consent for anything, or what are we talking about here?
It's Eliyahu's day to run the conversation, and he's started off by talking about, consent as kind of his moral compass or moral foundation.
Yeah, so wanting to minimize violating other people's consent.
Look, I hate to be the one to say this. When you're dealing with society and when you're dealing with a group of people that's larger than two, you're going to be sliding on a slippery slope, no matter what the context is, because there's a such thing as manufacturing consent. There's a such thing as fake consent. I mean, it's never going to be that simple.
Aaron, welcome to the conversation 48 minutes ago, because that's exactly how we started.
I told you I was late.
What would useful idiots go under, though?
What would what go under?
What would useful idiots go under?
What do you mean?
As far as consent goes, like people being used by a movement that they think is one thing, but it's really another.
As far as consent goes, are they not? Are you saying because they're somehow disabled or idiots, they shouldn't have the ability to consent on their own volition?
No. What I mean is, like, let's talk about.
What
would
be
controversial?
How would you consider idiot versus ignorant? Because I would classify that the same. Because at that consent
they're
point,
basically being lied to, so they're not. Their consent is actually being violated. So never mind.
You're consenting to being lied to, right? You're consenting to being fed.
Well, they don't know. They don't know they're being lied to.
This is like everybody with this chest-pounding jingoism, which is what has got to go. That is all those the people my country right or wrong are the useful idiots.
What do you mean? Why is that?
Typically peddle knowledge they don't have. That's what the idiots do.
I may have just stepped in, but I believe that ignorance means that you are unaware of facts that could change your opinion, and being an idiot would be somebody who has the facts in front of them but chooses not to take them seriously to change their opinion.
Maybe can't understand it.
I think that's one way too, and that's okay. There's naivety.
I was wanting to clarify, because if idiot means can't understand versus chooses, if it's chooses, then it's a different thing. But if an idiot can't, then their consent is being broken. If they're choosing not to listen, then they're applying consent idiotically, and they don't deserve to participate.
It's the same thing to me, because it's an understanding of comprehension either way.
Well, idiot means someone who's unable to understand. So we use it when we throw it as an insult to people. That's what it means to someone who is unable to understand.
Yeah,
is that what you meant, Metal?
We have to.
I think
you
so.
guys, when it comes to labels, we have to look at how it's used, right? Whatever the original intended meaning written in Webster's, it doesn't really matter when we're talking about. Well, we have to look at how it's actually used, like when, like it's important to bring up what we generally mean colloquially when we say idiot. And Ola is right. We mean it to mean like, the person is just wrong almost. Like that, you're such an idiot.
That's specifically why I asked Metalworks to define which version of idiot he was using in that instant.
Yeah.
Well, useful idiots is a slur as well, but useful idiots is to describe people who are like pawns in someone else's game, and they don't even know because they're too stupid to realize it.
I think they're considered being
broken. Aren't we all technically pawns in someone else's game?
Yeah.
We're working to make the rich richer.
Ouch.
Down with the establishment, man.
All the while from iPhones and comfortable air-conditioned vehicles and everything else.
I was gonna say, I don't want to fucking be part of this society. Where can I get my latte?
This is terrible. Let me just go on my own, man. It's all.
I just wish I could live out in the cabin and make my own coffee.
FaceTime with this rock.
Where am I gonna get some coffee? I could steep this root.
It is. It's all about coffee.
To me, the pinnacle of this argument about consent gets to one of the most touchy topics for me, which is parenting. because I've said many times in some of my darkest moments, I didn't ask to be put on this earth. And if I had a choice, I wouldn't have been. And I think that, for me at least, a great place to start when it comes to consent is how parents treat their kids. Now, everybody's different. Generalizations are not helpful in this case. But at the same time, you've got to recognize that you are literally bringing another living thing into this planet or onto this planet that seems to have a higher capacity for consciousness than most other things on this planet, where they have absolutely no say in where they're born, when they're born, or who they're born to. That is why I would probably never be a parent, because I feel like once my kid was old enough, I would have a lot of explaining to do as to why they're supposed to listen to me, why they're supposed to take me seriously, and why it's best that they appreciate everything that I do for them. Because I don't care what anybody says, the argument, if I ever got into a situation where my kid came up to me and said, well, who the hell told you to have me? I don't know how I'd respond to that question.
Well, I mean, I think there is a simple answer there, Aaron. It's like, I think it's our pleasure-seeking system that drives us to like having children. Like, we like it. We find a lot of pleasure in it. And you're talking.
I thought you were going to say that likes us having sex.
Right. Yeah. But it's not only. But it's not only that. It's also the prospect of like, oh, I get to have little tiny clothes for my little one, and all of these other pleasurable occurrences that come along with. I get to play with my Lego again. Like all.
That's ridiculous. If that was a reason justification.
No. I'm not saying, Bruce. It's the full on reason why
idiots.
someone's gonna. Then yeah, it's probably not a reasonable justification.
I don't even know if it's pleasure there, Travis, because and Bruce can correct, because I've only had one child and Bruce has many. But Travis, I don't know that it's pleasure seeking so much as there is a biological drive there. But I'm not sure I would put it under pleasure. It's a biological drive, to exist, I think.
To continue to exist.
Understanding that your body has been built to do just one thing, and that is reproduce. That's the only thing our body has been built for.
Yeah, but no, it's actually feeding off.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's
no,
it's not the only thing our body was built
yes,
for.
It is to pass on the DNA, to pass on the genes. That's all we're here for.
It's
No,
the primary purpose. It's not the only thing.
There is an argument to be made that we're just walking like reproduction sacks, and everything else is just convenience to help that out, right? Like, arguably, we're just DNA that wants to reproduce, and we found the most efficient way to do that was to create this thing we call a body and a brain, and that's more efficient than when we were just DNA cells. And
look, it's kind of weird when I would sacrifice myself for the kid instead of trying to have as many kids as possible.
Yeah, you guys,
someone messed up.
You guys, I just have to say, you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what's going on in our neurology. That's all I have to say.
Reproduction is one of our primary.
We don't move.
Primary.
You guys, we don't move
one.
to do anything unless we are baited to do so. We don't.
But it doesn't mean that it's always pleasure.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't. That's just something you've invented.
The way
It doesn't mean it's always pleasure.
No,
it could be long-term pleasure through short-term pain, but we
Yes.
do things. But we invest in pleasure is what we like to do. So it's different.
And this is
Doesn't that depend
a
on
time
your
to.
perspective on life?
I don't understand how you can't prove that. You've made that. You've literally just made it up.
I'm living proof.
No, it's not just made up. If you understood how our corpus callosum works and how everything in our nervous system actually is orchestrated based on a hierarchy, because one thing is actually selected over the other, you will see that the chemistry in our brain actually gives you a preference over one thing or the other, and that is why you select that thing, down to the very word that emerges out of your mind or the very motion that emerges through your motor system.
Now, if the pleasure switch is turned on by you having children, Do you think the pleasure switch is there to obey the drive to have children? Or do you think the drive to have children just kind of happen because the pleasure switch was on? No, it's the first. It's like chicken and egg. The pleasure switch is turned on to make you do something, but the drive that has got that pleasure switch to turn on is the drive to reproduce. That's it.
You're wrong.
I think I'm right.
Anybody
But
wants to know?
all of this is to say that everything else that I've heard discussed here, not trusting the government, whether there are bad people, I don't believe anybody starts out as quote unquote bad. Like, I know I used to believe in the sort of Thomas Hobbes that everybody was born an asshole, but when you finally take, when the red finally clears your eyes, you realize, no, people are born pretty neutral and pretty in tune with their most basic instincts.
Yep.
It's mostly our nurture that determines our environment around us, that determines the kind of people we turn into. And that's why I personally believe I don't have all the answers. I don't think there really is a right answer when it comes to the best way to move forward in human society. It's just too complex for that. But one of the things I can say, I personally think that if we're going to be a society that prioritizes living peacefully amongst each other, we need to put a lot more emphasis and a lot more scrutiny on parents.
From what ought?
Kids don't have consent. Kids do not have consent. They don't get to say, hey, would you like to be born in this shitty neighborhood on the south side of Chicago? Because Lord knows I would have said no.
Do you like being beaten? No.
No?
Not like that.
Like having your father run a fuck away and go fuck somebody else while your mother has to take care of you by herself? No?
No.
Oh.
That's the
At the risk of
consent, if you ask me.
At the risk of that being a little too personal, one of the things that I talked about this, I think 2 weeks ago on the Pangburn Philosopher channel about what is the ideal relationship between parent and child. And I still apply a lot of the same standards. So I know that I'm not qualified to speak as an expert on parenting, having not been one and not having a PhD in child development. But it seems to me that,
man. Just tell us what you think. I don't give a shit about your degrees. They mean as much to me as the POP in your fridge.
POP.
I see.
It's just pop is soda. It's rhymes with PhD. Same letters. Anyway. It's a joke.
Oh, okay.
I just had to break down the whole joke. Sorry, Pangburn.
It's a Canadian joke.
It's all good.
Okay. The PhD in your wall is worth as much as the POP in your. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
Well, the problem is you called it pop instead of soda. That's really what threw Eliyahu off.
Yeah.
Who cares?
How about
that
the
was a
ADHD?
Canadian joke, not a United States joke, based clearly.
So you're asking? There's some people in the
Yeah,
US.
sorry, go ahead, Eliyahu.
If I was gonna talk about a parenting philosophy that I think would maximize the well-being of the kid, I mean, yeah, okay. Aaron's philosophy, just don't have them, and you don't have any of this risk to take on, and you're not imposing any of this risk. Yeah, okay, that's one solution. But if you are going to go ahead, and thrust a consciousness into this machine, if you have an option to give them consent to something, you want to make them feel like they're part of a decision-making process, I think that's a great thing to do.
One thing that I stand to, I have 4 children. Well, 3. I say 4. Sorry, abortion people, but I say 4. It is a child in the womb. We don't do anything for our children that they could do themselves, or they could attempt to. So it gives them a feeling of autonomy. And then they can, if they get to the point where they start asking questions like, why do I have to do this? I find it a success in my world, because that means I'm doing my job if they're actually asking why. So it's inevitable that they will, but I think that strategy is a quality strategy.
Do you answer with the full adult version of why with every following event that it's leading to?
Well, you broke up. What did you say?
Do you answer that question thoroughly, or do you end it because I said so?
If you say because I said so, you should have your kids taken away. You are not fit to be a parent.
Little dramatic there. Little dramatic.
Yeah, you can come try.
No, it's not.
But anyway, that's not
in a row.
It depends on the circumstance.
This entire conversation about, I agree with that. I will give you that. If it's, you have to have a certain balance where, in an emergency, they will understand it's an emergency event. We'll discuss
or their
why
age.
later.
Well, I'm pretty blessed. Like my kid was, I don't like tooting my own horn because it makes me look weird, but tooting my kid's horn for him. He's beyond the capacity of people his age. Okay. So he is 2 years old asking those sorts of questions, or 3 years old. So like at a certain point you have to try and navigate it so that you're not just telling him, because I said so, but they're also like, there's only so much you can't speak in a language that's essentially foreign to them, but you can't speak in a language that's too stupid to them. So you kind of meet somewhere in between, so that they can, No, that's doesn't work.
I'm not saying that always has to be.
All science points to contact with language increases understanding. So if you talk over a child's head, yeah, they're not going to get it now.
Science.
But the 38th time that they hear that same way explained over their head, they're going to start understanding those words more and more. And they're going to be introduced to those bigger words and higher capacity thoughts much longer, more consistently over a longer period of time. That is studying. That is what praying is. That is what meditating is. This whole trying to act like you have to talk to a child at the level that are at is completely wrong. We don't teach anybody that.
No, it's not completely wrong.
The science is the psychology on that is not so simple, but you get to a point where you're speaking slightly above their level, but not to the point where they can't actually get any out of it. So it's a fine line. That's the line.
I'm not, and by the way, I'm not saying that at some point you're gonna have to resort to the just because I said so. But you can take me as an example. I don't have a whole lot of respect for authority because people tend to abuse that authority, and parents are the worst. My mother's philosophy was, you live in my house, so you live by my rules. And of course, these days, I don't talk to her, but these days I would go, who the hell told you to have me? If you're just going to say my house, my rules. Like, if you got to talk that way to your kids, you shouldn't be a parent. Plain and simple. Sorry.
If you want to
if that's the first thing, if that's well, yeah. If that's immediately what you jump to, you are not fit to be a parent. Period.
I think you can come up with some very strong generalizations that they just don't sound right. So is that Aaron talking? I can understand if you've had that experience and it sounds a really bad experience, why you're saying that, and I can respect your version of events, but you cannot apply it to everybody who's hearing that, and everybody goes, oh no, I heard someone say because I said so they must be a bad parent. That's not the way it works. But I appreciate what you're trying to say. I think it's really interesting that what you're really saying was you were not respected as a person when you were a child. It was like your whole person wasn't respected. And that is wrong. And people shouldn't be parents if they can't respect the little person they brought into life.
I know that you say that I can't apply it to everybody, but there's a general principle that can't be derived from that because it all goes back to consent. Your kid didn't have a choice as to whether or not they were born or not. So if the first thing that they understand from you is you're the parent, you're the one in charge, what are you teaching them?
So it goes back to what Michael was saying the other day on another discussion.
Service. That's what you're teaching them. That's where that mentality comes from, by the way.
So Michael said and it was the George Washington principles, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, in that order. So yeah, you gave them life first. Consent doesn't come into it. You gave them life. Of course you can't have consent in that. After that you give them liberty, and that is all about consent. And then after that you give them the pursuit of happiness, and that is about more than consent. That's about enthusiastic consent.
I mean, I do stand by that. I do think we got it right. I mean, not by we. I mean, I think Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers got it right. That order: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Locke really did.
Yeah.
I think the only thing you really need is one parent just needs to be the right kind of authority figure, so the kid doesn't get out of line. So they know that's the person that they have to listen to. You know, that's the authority figure. because you kind of need a kid to respect authority to a degree.
Yes.
Understand authority and realize its capacities and what it's used for, and it's understand the tools.
The only problem is, like, I don't want the situation where the parent is saying, "My house, my rules," and they abuse the child, like Aaron. I want, if they say "my house, my rules," they know that while they're saying that, they have to be very careful how they treat the kid. Even if they are saying that, they know that they have to be very trepidatious in how they treat the kid, because, they could seriously scar them and stuff. But the other parental figure type, I think, that is also very essential to parenthood, I think, is someone. I think you need two parents. I don't think single parent doesn't work. I just think it makes it harder. But I think the reason why it's good to have two parents is one can be the authority figure and one can be the maternal figure, the one that the child could go to talk to.
No, both can be both.
Or you could do both.
Can be both.
They can be both, but I think when they're both, one is.
See what you think and see what would fit.
I think when the parent is both, one they dip into it a little bit, because one is wearing the pants and one is the nice guy. When my parents is like, yeah, my dad would get strict sometimes, but he was the nice guy, the nice guy when I was growing up. He was the kind of maternal dad, while my mom was very not too strict but very demanding. And again, she could be nice too, but funny enough, if there was something I wanted, I would go to my mom because my dad was just cheap.
Understanding why rules are rules. My son is not allowed to say cuss words. I and my wife both cuss around him just like I normally do on this server or anything else. We don't hold back at all for any reason.
And for the Canadians out there, what is cussing?
It's swear words.
Their mommy, daddy
Oh.
Got a little bit older, that they're just words that other people find rude. And there are situations where you may use them that might make people upset. So it's easier to just not use them. And that's why we keep you from doing it, just so you don't get in the habit. But you will be eventually. This allows him to understand that there's a much broader mechanism happening. There's stuff that he's not going to be allowed to do that he's going to see people doing. And allows him to see the mechanism by which I'm expressing my authority and the fact that I have a reason behind what I'm saying. But I've also described that there's going to be times when I'm going to tell you things that it's a much more complicated situation than this, that I can't explain the whole thing. Like, you just have to wear pants and underwear to the store. You're not going to get into
Yeah.
Well, you don't think that he's trying out those swear words behind your back?
He probably is.
Yeah, that's.
You'd be surprised. Some kids don't.
My back?
You'd be surprised. Some kids don't.
I'll give you another example. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll give you another example of something I didn't learn from my parents. I respect beliefs. Yes, you heard it here first, folks. An African-American male in America respects the police.
Oh, no.
Not because they have, quote-unquote, authority. Or at least not necessarily. I respect police because I understand why they have so much authority. I understand how much responsibility they have. I understand how much danger they put themselves in to do that job that has to be done if we're going to live in this kind of society. That's why I respect the police. It's a very shitty job, and it doesn't pay very much either.
No,
now, if my mother didn't spend half her time yelling at me because I got sick and I quote, now I have to go out and buy something, maybe, just maybe, I would have a little bit more respect for them, because even though they really shouldn't have had me at all, they at least tried. I don't necessarily give them brownie points for doing the shit that they were supposed to do, lest I get taken away and thrown into an orphanage somewhere. But had they had actually taken the time to at least help me appreciate the fact that they were trying to raise me and keep me fed, I might have a little bit more respect for them, in the same way that I have respect for police, because I understand the kind of shit that they have to go through on a daily basis. These are the types of lessons that we could be teaching kids, and they may grow up to be slightly more respectable human beings. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Also, to bring it back to consent, and two separate things to address what's been said here as far as parenting goes. When Metalworks was talking about the single parent model not working out as well, I think one of the reasons for that is because of consent. When you are in a single parent household, and or let's expand it. If you're in a household where there's only one adult and they're making all the decisions, even if it would be better if it was a mom and an aunt or a mom and a cousin or somebody else. You have to, as a kid in your household, you're going to see compromise. You're going to see the adults disagree. You have to work it out. But if there is only one adult in the house, they are a dictator. You do not ever have to see them compromise with somebody else. You don't ever have to see them work something out.
And this is why I mentioned that you want one parent that's kind of like authority and one's a little more maternal, because if you go to the more authority, are you going to go to the authority figure, the one? Who are you going to go to? The one that's more likely to punish you, or the one that's more likely to go call you if you did something wrong? No, you're going to call your mom, like, Mom, I messed up the car. Can you help me out? Don't tell Dad.
Doesn't that fundamentally contradict Eliyahu's point in that, like, you're not really getting compromised if you have an authority figure parent? Like, wouldn't it be better to have two parents that are showing equal power, and the idea that, like, in society, in society, there's going to be one person you go to who's not going to punish you, or one person who's only going to punish you. In society, the reality is it's like kind of a crapshoot neutral thing. And so you really want parent that's just neutral and compromising. I think this goes back to Eliyahu's point. Even if you only have a single parent, if you learn to compromise, even with the child, right? Like, there is compromise where you can get consent from a child. Obviously, at a certain age, if they're one and can't, physically talk, obviously we're not talking about that. They have to at some point have comprehension. But once they have the level of comprehension where they could give consent, I think that's where you work to kind of get to that point where you, as best to your ability, get consent. And again, it goes back to Eliyahu's point originally when he started, that there is times where you can violate consent where if this other individual knew all the facts, they would agree to their consent being violated, right? And this goes back to where, this gives that sort of like, because I told you so loophole, because it's not the I told you so loophole, it's I have more facts that I can try to explain to you, but you just can't comprehend currently, and you will one day. And so understand that, like, if you have that relationship, I will only violate your consent if it's in a position where I'm trying the best with my reasonable explanation. I know Bruce is going to hop in and say, again, that's subjective, but we had this hour conversation. But again, going back to Eliyahu's point, is that it's all about consent to the point of which you can only break when you really are doing it, for life, liberty, preserving, where it's really for the life of the person, for the liberty of the person, and then finally pursue their happiness. And that in that order, when you can break consent.
Well, the problem is not every parent's going to be thinking about this kind of stuff.
Not every human being is going to be thinking about this.
My dad was a construction worker, and my mom went to college for hairdressing. And my dad decided, like, you know what? I'm going to go work at King's College, because if my kids get good enough grades, they can go there for free. None of us did that. None of us went to King's College. None of us had the grades for it, because he didn't seem to understand, like, in order for that to work, you either need to, come on us hard and make us, do the work and get good grades, or, let us do what we want. And he was kind of doing a half-ass thing where he was like, I want you to get good grades, but I also don't mind if you want to do what you want, but I still think you should do this. I'm like, you're contradicting yourself. What are you doing? Like, my brother should have clearly went into, should have been a mechanic, but he'd rather him go to college. And I'm like, he doesn't want to go to college. Like, what were you thinking? He clearly did not like it. And my brother had my brother's relationship with the family is very strenuous. So it was very volatile when I was growing up. I remember waking up in the morning all the time, my mom screaming up to the attic going like, Phil, you're going to goddamn school, get out of bed. So hearing that,
well, that raises in my
like, he
mind,
wouldn't go, and he was really good at what he did. He got good grades, but he kept hanging around with scumbags and being a shitty teenager and rebelling. But they weren't being perfect parents either. It was people were being, to me, wrong all around. Like, my dad thought he knew best, and he was wrong. And that's the
Dude,
problem.
just wait
You're
till
gonna have
wait till you have kids.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not having
There's no such thing.
I am not
no such thing as a
interested in
perfect parent.
It's okay to be wrong. You're going to be wrong all the time. But the humility that you show at admitting you're wrong
And
is
then-
far more valuable than
and
never
that
being
never
wrong.
happened, and that never happened.
Yeah, well, that's, I mean, you need to have a standard for that. And fortunately, many people do not have a standard for that.
My dad thought he was right and is very, very arrogant. And even though he tries to act like the nice guy that everyone likes, everyone loves Jimmy. He's such a good guy. I'm like, yeah,
Well-
he's also a mediocre father.
Speaking of consent and parenting, I also had a conversation very recently about this, and this is another thing I can't stand about parents. The parents who raise their kids, like the fathers who raise their sons and say, hey, when you get of age, you're taking over the family business, or I'm going to raise you to be a football player or a basketball player. In my opinion, that is a violation of consent.
Shit. I hate that shit.
Am I alone in this thing?
Well, you can do one or two things. You can say, I'm going to give you the family business, or you're not getting any money for college, or any of those things. So like you can see it as an investment that you're making for the child, and you hand it over to him, and then it's up to him if he wants to crush it, waste it, or what have you. So you can say, I'm going to give you a college fund, trust fund, nothing, a business, what have you. They don't want it and they decide to waste it. There should be some discussion there as to whether or not you're deserving of it, or there should be some consequences for just taking money and wiping your ass with it, or whatever the case is. So it's not so simple.
They could
There
they
sorta
could
is
talk
the
to their
perfect
son and ask
example.
him, like, what do you want to do, son? Because that
that
conversation never happened.
You guys, just 2 seconds.
But at the same time,
what were you saying, Scott? Yeah.
There's an absolute perfect example of this. Just look at Tiger Woods and his dad. Like obviously his dad pushed him to doing that, but did it benefit him? Did it
look at
benefit
Mozart.
Tiger Woods?
Mozart
So
was
it's not necessarily kind of
William
issue.
Sisters and Andy
Yeah,
Murray.
it's
I
true.
was going to say exactly the same, Scott, because Andy Murray's mother put her whole life into tennis before Andy Murray was born, and then put her life back into tennis after he was born, and his brother, and created champions. And they are happy. That's where they wanted to be. So what are you going to have that argument that parents have to make those decisions?
Well, and Tiger Woods is doing the same with his son.
He wouldn't have been happy to do something else, though.
Well, he might have been, but that doesn't. I mean, how do we can't see the future?
Like, is that
How do you know he
actual
wouldn't have
approval,
chose
or is that just a desire to please mommy and daddy by doing the thing that they want you to do rather than what you want to do?
What if what you wanted to do was
both.
knit sweaters and end up on heroin on the side of the street because you didn't have any opportunities?
Sure.
You wanted to do it, go for it. Yeah, go ahead. Lay with the pigs. I'll be the prodigal son's father when you come home, and I'll give you my cloak and the ring. That's sure. But there are better alternatives.
That's why I said parents should strictly pick one. Either you are hard on your kids and you make them get good grades and you get them to do something good, or you support them in the endeavors they want to do. Pick one. Don't try to do this half-ass, middle-of-the-road, contradicting shit that my dad did. I mean,
I think
everyone has an axe to grind with their parents.
Metal's got a.
I got to.
What was that, Ola?
I got to a
Tiger Woods'
certain
parents
age where
did
I'm
what?
like,
Tiger Woods' parents and the Williams sisters' parents and Andy Murray's mum, they did both. That's the thing. They did do both. They were hard on them and they were supportive. That's the trick. It's not this either or. And earlier on where you're going,
I agree.
You have to be two parents and one is authoritative and one is maternal. Heck no. You have to do work together as a team. Yeah, play to your strengths. But you can have one person who can be the authority and be maternal. And it might be two women doing it, two men doing it, three women doing it, one person doing it. The point is to do it all, not to be nasty cop and nice cop. You're just making psychological issues for the future if you're going to have nasty cop, nice cop people.
especially
Who's Andy Murray again? Who's Andy Murray?
Tennis
player.
champion.
Oh, okay, that explains it.
I think a lot of problems. This is just my own personal opinion. maybe it's just because of my own shitty childhood, but I just feel like a lot of problems with society all stem back to the way people are raised. Like
well, we used to say you ain't got no home training. We used to say home training.
Tell me I've had people tell me my parents didn't raise me right, and I went, yeah, they didn't. Like, what
well,
do
they
you want me to
probably
do about it now.
Well, yeah, it doesn't do anything to tell you that, but it's an explanation.
Okay,
Yeah.
what?
See, I mean, I guess the only hang up with is all you really have to point out one example of a child who wasn't raised right, who ended up doing good,
Right.
and I think there are many of there of that exact same thing. So it it makes it tough to say, oh, it's because of this or because of this. I think you're getting it not for is at that point.
There's outliers. I mean, there's some cards that people are dealt, and they're you can't necessarily say it's fair. Some people are.
That's not fair.
I mean,
exactly. Life is full of problems. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to think I'm an outlier because, I mean, sure, both of my parents were a goddamn nightmare all of my life, and my peers weren't any better, but I'm not in jail or strung out on drugs. I'm a truck driver.
You're not supposed to be in jail or strung out on drugs.
I think you're doing really well for yourself, if anything.
Well, the thing is, they're not going to have low expectations for you, Aaron.
Well,
you're not supposed to be in jail, and you're not supposed to be on drugs, so you don't get an award for not being on them. You get an award for being an adult and driving a truck.
I don't need an award, but it does at least give me some level of comfort to know that I didn't allow all of the trauma to drive me to going to because I've seen too many prison documentaries where they all point back to my rough upbringing, and I'm like, but you still could have chosen to not let that be the reason why you go murder somebody. Like,
yes, isn't that interesting, Aaron? Because the your own personal experience goes against what you had said right before. You know what I mean? Where it was because initially you had said something about the parents not raising people right and all that kind of stuff, and then you yourself even. Hey, I wasn't raised there. So even without being raised right, it's not necessarily all things come back to parents not raising kids right, because obviously in your own situation, you that, right?
That's how you react
to
it.
As far as you guys know, yes, but trust me, I'm not right in the head. Trust me, I've got depression, I've got anger issues, all types of weird and unfortunate sexual desires. It's not great.
Also, my problem
and by the way, I'm not saying
you found your tribe.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not saying that parenting is solely to blame. I mean, at some point, people are responsible for their own decisions. But what I am saying is, and that's why I said, making sure that and I don't believe that there's a such thing as a quote unquote right way to raise a child, because every person is different, just that little bit. But so I wouldn't even say raise you right. I would say raise you well.
Yes.
And I believe that one of the best
You just nailed the right word, brother. Well.
I feel like one of the best places we can start is maybe coming to a consensus of how to better raise kids, so that maybe some of these issues finally get to go away. Maybe.
And I think that was the issue with my parents. It's like, it's not that maybe they didn't choose the right way. It's just they didn't do it well enough. They didn't put all their effort into it, and that's the problem. Like, when you're picking up Tiger Woods and all these you're picking up really exceptional individuals. I mean,
yeah, but their
of
parents
course they
didn't
did it well.
necessarily do it right. Metalworks. Their parents didn't necessarily do it right. You think they're not in therapy?
But did they do it well?
I think they did it well. It sounds like they did. It sounds like
It
they're in a better
depends on,
relationship than my family.
What is right though? Like, there's so many subjective pieces to that, because we have to decide what is well, what is right. All of that kind of stuff is just
the best we could ever do is come to a universal consensus. That's the best we could ever do.
Yeah, well, Aaron,
it may still be subjective, but at least it's the
here
majority.
comes my sales pitch on well-being. This is why
the snake oil salesman has returned.
If you if you adhere to the idea of the same well-being that we measure in the hospitals and doctors measure as just the foundation of what well-being means, obviously above that, there's going to be different things. Is it in the child's best interest from a well-being standpoint, which is going to be hard to measure in the moment, to allow them to play an 8-hour day of Nintendo? Well, I can think of a couple scenarios. Just looking at that at that day, I can think of a couple scenarios where, yeah, it's fine. It's Christmas. They got a new game, and then I could also think of like, okay, if they've been playing a lot of games, maybe it's time to expand the horizons of the mind a little bit. And
unless they're going to make money out of it.
Well, I think
the funny enough, when my parents had me, they just gave me a Lego table and that was it. They let me do my own thing. They didn't really bother me much. I was baby.
And now you're an architect, right?
I wish. No. Oh God, I wish. No, my problem was they always kept telling me, do this, make money. I'm like, I don't want to make money. I want a career that makes me happy.
Like you
need money. You need money. And I'm like, I don't want a job that makes me money. That's not going to
there's some money required to do something, I would imagine.
Oh, I agree with that. I understand that completely.
You need to eat.
I understand.
Really, the question is not make money. The question is get the hell out of the house.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying.
Instead of constantly having others do it for you.
Oh no!
Just 2 seconds. Yeah.
I muted him.
Hey,
fix your echo, Nivek.
The YouTube feed.
Mute the YouTube feed, bro. I tried to unmute him, but he's still bad.
Nivek, just turn off the YouTube feed, and then we'll be good.
I don't think my parents want me to leave because they're pretty old now and they need help.
Nope, he's still. All right, bro, I'm kicking you.
So, Travis, when you talk about consent, are you basically talking about people's ability to make choices on their own and of their own volition?
Well, I think consent is just one of the sub mechanisms we can use for the greater mechanism of maximizing well-being. So there's a lot of sub mechanisms that you can use to maximize someone's well-being, like conversation therapy, psychological therapy, like a lot of different things that you can do. So
well,
I think consent is a good. People like consent, right? If people didn't like consent, like the feeling of it. And I would argue, and I know Ola's going to blow her top off, but I would say people find it to be a pleasurable pursuit to have consent, and they find it a pleasurable idea, and that's why we fight for it, right? But it's all subjective. Sure. So because and it's an interesting thing, like even in some forms of extreme like rape play and sex, the further away you can get from consent in those games, the more like the sub or the true dom will like to engage with that. So it's this consent is one of those interesting things where like any other term, it is subjective, but as a general rule, we can start, and I think it's a good presupposition to start with. What Eliyahu starts with is that, in general, people want consent as opposed to not having consent. General.
Well, here's a spicy topic for you. I watched this was a while ago. Todd Valinsky's Secular Talk was talking about how the Hawaiian government was either planning to or did pass a ruling saying that you had to be about 100 years old before you could purchase cigarettes. And he said, you've got to give people the freedom to make bad choices.
Did you say you have to be 100 years old to purchase a cigarette?
This is Hawaii. Yep. Mm-hmm.
That is literally what it said.
That's funny.
Basically,
because they figure you're going to die smoking. You're going to die after you smoke them, so, yeah.
So
that's really funny.
I think that gets onto an interesting. Is it a violation of consent to say that we shouldn't give people the freedom to make bad choices if this pursuit that you keep talking about is our primary goal?
Well, it's not a goal. It's not a goal in the Aaron. It's not a goal in like the choice sense, like the illusion of free will. It's not that kind of goal. I think it's the fundamental property that's at the front of the selection process of our what has been called consciousness. So that's just more to do with the deterministic realities of our biology. I don't think people are consciously just seeking pleasure. Yeah. So
you don't think we consciously seek pleasure?
No. They do, but I'm not saying that on. My pleasure drive theory applies to the biological realities of the deterministic causal chain. It's not talking about like, you'll have wants to that you feel that aren't necessarily pleasurable pursuits, like getting up in the morning for your job. You're not going to feel a lot of pleasure out of doing that if you're fucking tired, or doing your, let's say for you, doing your 19th millionth route to this down the same damn road to the same damn stop,
Giggity.
Yeah, well,
giggity.
But it also comes from this innate desire to survive. So I do it because I know I don't eat. Well, I probably could eat for a while, but I do it because I know I wouldn't eat otherwise. So.
Yeah, and I think that in itself is a pleasurable pursuit. But let's not. We'll keep it to consent if we can.
Okay, but
I think that there is a discussion to be had about whether people consenting to making bad choices is something that should be discussed, because a lot of the time those bad choices can have an effect on other people who maybe don't consent to having their lives affected by other people's bad choices.
The thing you do is you empower those who would have their consent violated to then be able to react to the consent that has been violated, as opposed to nerfing their ability to react and trying to stop it.
That's not the right way to go, because now you just need to sorry.
What, it's not the right way to have somebody have the consent over their own body to defend themselves in whatever way they see fit.
Like you shouldn't just say, "Hey, I said to do it, so they should do it."
Ola just left. That's weird. So if you're going to say that somebody might be harmed, so we have to stop this from occurring, that's a never-ending pursuit. But but allowing people to have the ability to withdraw reasonably from an otherwise consenting contract, or defend themselves reasonably, that's how you would solve that problem.
You're never going to get rid of suffering.
Of course not. That's why you can't stop it from the beginning. You just give people the ability to play defense or go on the offense if they have to.
I wouldn't make that claim. I can actually think of a simulation where, we download the emergent qualities of our mind, so basically a biological copy of ourselves, into software form, where we actually eliminate suffering, and I think it's possible, because I don't think we're in suffering avoidance. I think we're in the pursuit of pleasure. So I think if we can actually create a simulation where you don't have to have the pain and gross feeling, but you still are going to have the pursuing higher and higher and higher.
That assumes that we're not going to have suffering in the mental capacities. It's not just a physical issue.
Yeah, no.
What are
you saying is pleasure? Go ahead.
We also have an innate desire to seek out basically challenges, right? Like that's innate in our brains. It's almost like we have a natural defense against complacency, and part of that is seeking something to occupy ourselves with. That's where this whole leftist movement came from, because they don't know real suffering. They had to make up suffering. They had to invent the demons to slay. So that's always going to be there. So if you take that away, I don't know what the hell's going to happen to human beings. We're going to find something. As long as we have these brains, no matter what you put it in, we're going to find something to point to say, I suffer because of this.
Where do you draw the line of what is pleasure and what is pain? Or where do you draw the line of what is pleasure and what is not pleasure?
Isn't that like sunshine and rain?
Yeah, we can measure pain. So we can measure how our bodies are processing pain and pleasure, like neurologically.
It's like sunshine and rain.
Wait, why did white win? Did I run out of time?
So
Oh no, I got fucking checkmate.
I didn't know you were playing chess, and I was like, "What do you mean white won?" That's a different.
The whites won this time.
Yeah,
Whites, they won this time.
there isn't a distinction between pleasure and pain unless you have some objective authority on what pleasure and pain is. It's fully subjective.
Well, we actually, guys, I'm talking again when I'm talking about my pleasure drive theory. I'm talking about the measurable brain states of pleasure and pain, and this is something that we understand in neurology.
Are you talking about the release of dopamine?
Well, then what
like
you're
that?
talking about only applies to the human condition, correct? And not it's not a universal truth.
It's a universal objective reality about how our biological systems interact with the deterministic cosmos. That's what mine doesn't have to do with the subjective elements, even though the objective system will be tuned to the subjective experience. But I'm talking about the fundamental mechanism that we go from, non-life to life, and what is the mechanism that starts the perpetual motion. So there's a mechanism that starts the perpetual motion. Just think of the cell reaching out to things around it, bumping into things, starting to develop sense. And so from there, how do we get from there to a conscious brain, and how does that fundamental property work inside our conscious brain? And I think there's a lot more similarities, which I'm finding writing my first book. I think there's a lot more similarities than people will suspect between us and turtles and the fundamental first emergent life cell. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I'm starting to, and just a little teaser for my book, there is this constant conductor, I call, as if they're conducting an orchestra of neurons. And I use this metaphor to kind of give people a picture of what I imagine when I'm thinking about how the first self-replicating cell relates to what's going on in our brain through every instant of passing time. So
can't pleasure be biologically described as the release of dopamine?
So
DMT,
yeah,
right?
you're starting to Aaron, you're going down the right path. It has to do with our relationship of, and it's a very weird thing to talk. The reason why I'm writing a book is because I can't do it in a video, but it's this idea of something, and this is the fundamental unanswered question, the thing that Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, all of these people who think about consciousness scratch their head over, and the reason why they say we don't know what it is. The unanswered question is, what is the thing, whatever you want to call it? I call it the pleasure drive because I think it relates to what's going on. But what is the thing that's sitting at this place selecting, if you have equal opportunities, essentially equal, down to the smallest fraction you could ever imagine, equal opportunities to go with this selection over the other? And I'm talking about small things as much as like the smallest little motor function this way, like how I'm using my fingers right now, if you guys can see my screen. Like I'm doing these little movements. Why was it this movement and not this movement? We're talking about really, really small fractions of time and individual neurological activity. So it's very detailed, but I think there's a way to think about this and to theorize and to equate this and connect it to the fundamental nature of what is, the law of life, a kind of a physical law in itself. And that's what my first book's about.
Yeah, the only thing I think about with that is, I think it really comes down to it, which would be the difference between pleasure and avoiding. So when you could look at something like pleasure, there is going to be a physical response in your body to on or something.
You're cutting up, brother.
But can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. That's better.
Yeah, say it's something along the line of pleasure. There's a biological element to that releases a certain amount of neurochemicals, all that kind of stuff, something like that. But at the same time, avoiding pain isn't necessarily the same thing. So it's like if you go through some sort of painful area, you are going to have these neurochemical transmitters like flood your to protect you. Like your body goes into shock to protect against like, okay, my body, like I realize like my hips are broken, so I'm just not going to feel pain. So it really is the same thing.
Like I think
different semantic.
Yeah, sorry, you're breaking up a bit there, but I know what you're saying. I think it can be all categorized as pleasurable pursuits, and it's dealing with, the biological entity is coming up against something that is just the level of suffering coming towards the entity is so unavoidable. Like, and this is when people go into shock and things like that, and why the brain does die, why the brain, our brains die, right? The system stops, and sometimes these mechanisms of shock or stroking, or I would say these reactions of shock or stroking out shows us that that perpetual system can be interrupted, and what does that look like, and why is it, let's say that why does the conductor hit the emergency button here? Even sometimes when like when you have like there's a simple like what's it called, like a brain aneurysm, right? Why can't the conductor just say close off that area? It kind of does do that, but why can't it close off that area and still keep brain function moving and operating around that? And I'm saying it kind of already does, but the thing that I don't is hard to grasp is that just looking at how fast things happen, why can't the conductor move around that in a way that doesn't stroke out the biological entity, like it doesn't do the damage that it does? And I think the answer to that is that it's a fragile system. I think there's sort of like a perfect real life example of it out in the physical. You saw what on the one in California. So mudslide took out the one, and then what previously was a 45-minute trip down the one turned into a 200-minute trip to get to the same point because you could no longer go down there. So I think when certain things happen, that conductor's like, oh, we have to shut these areas off to protect everything else, and they have to shut off certain things that says, okay, it's for the greater good that you'll keep living, but you're not going to smell anymore. Here's something really fucked too. You know how every human being is essentially unique. Even identical twins have some uniqueness to them because the experience does some shaping. Every single conductor, what I'm calling the conductor, is fucking unique. Yeah. As the same as every orchestra, the conductor of every orchestra is unique. And by the way, just since we're on YouTube, if anyone missed this, I'll just read a little sneak segment that I have released so far, just as a tease. And this is from the chapter, The Musical Notation of Brain Pleasure. It was one of the chapters in my first book. By the way, this actually might not be released first because I have like 3 handbooks that I'm writing. So it actually might be the fundamentals of life might be released before this. But anyways, The Musical Notation of Brain Pleasure. Adjacent to each other in the midbrain, there exists the substantia nigra and ventral tegmental area, VTA. These at-ready orchestral auditoriums of neurons, uniquely including large percussive sections of dopamine, await their cue from the conductor. At-ready, but not in anticipation, as this orchestra knows nothing. This vacant robotic orchestra awaits dictation. There is no resistance, no revolt, simply an adherence to the demand of the conductor, the pleasure drive. So along with the book, I will have some imagery in the book, some artistic imagery, just to show what I'm thinking of and what I'm seeing. And some of this will be depicted in paintings, and I might do some music with this as well. But basically, giving the orchestral sections each a property of the mind, just to help better to help give a model that people can imagine the orchestra, the conductor in front of the orchestra, and the perpetual motion of the conductor's arm. You can imagine that perpetual motion of the arm is essentially what I am using to symbolize that fundamental property that makes life unique, and it is self-replication. So,
can I go on a bit of a mini branch here about this whole idea of uniqueness?
Sure.
I think I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but if I am, so be it. To say that all people are unique, my first thought is to go, yeah, no shit, we're not all the same person. That's like saying that every individual pairing of quarks is unique, or every star is unique. It's like, yeah, they're not all the same thing. And I think that I almost wonder at this point if we as a species, without our permission, have this innate desire or this innate understanding that our uniqueness is only surface level, and that we strive to try to not be like everybody else, and that we constantly tell them, you're unique, you're special. When people tell me I'm special, I look at them kind of with a blank expression on my face.
I think you're special, Aaron.
Yeah.
You're a very special. You're a very special.
I don't think I'm special at all.
You're a very special ape, like all of us, man.
I can almost
exactly. So
guarantee
you said he's very
there has-
special, but the same. So is he different or the same? You contradicted yourself in that very sentence.
No, I didn't.
That's my.
You said you're
my
very
point.
special
I'm
and
talking
unique,
about.
just like
It
the
is a
rest of us.
contradiction. It is a contradiction in and of itself. You
That's an
cannot escape
oxymoron.
this.
You
Like, well,
cannot-
that's a whole
you cannot
thing.
be
It is
special part of a group.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you
There's,
can.
I mean, you
that's a
can,
thing. Like,
but it's only surface level. That's the problem.
But you can
It's not
always be
necessarily
linked
surface.
to a much larger group than yourself, correct?
You can, but that
So
doesn't mean
so
you're not.
being unique is just being a particular amalgamation of a bunch of different individuals into one, rather than you
Yes.
being unique to yourself. There's no individual that has a thought that no other individual has ever had.
Or an idea or an artistic
No,
expression.
that's
It's
just
Really?
It's
So
just
the
dead wrong.
the second that I'm the
Wrong.
first one, so the second that I'm the first person to have an initial idea that nobody else has ever had,
Yes.
and I say it to one other person, I am no longer unique.
No, the bullshit. Because that happens every single fucking. So you could take 30 people, show them the exact same picture, and they're all going to have different ideas.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't negate the fact that okay,
No,
50%
you're just
of those
pulling in
people
different
are.
groups.
No.
I'm saying,
no.
what I'm
no,
saying
no,
is
no.
you
No,
then
hold on,
become
hold
a
on.
part of the group that has seen the painting, or you become a part of the group that likes the
But
painting.
that doesn't matter because you could have seen that thought that you had initially as different person sitting next to you thought that they had. So that's the whole thing. It's this idea of like, of course we are
That's not
experiencing
what was said.
experiencing these
That's
things.
not what was said. It's not that it's random. That's like saying that you're not part of the
No.
human
I'm
species
not
because you're not a
saying
human.
it's.
We're saying that
No,
if
that's
you
not
interact,
what I'm
if I
saying at
interact with
all.
an identical thought, if I say blue is what we call the sky, and I'm the first human to think that, or the first entity to have ever had the thought that the sky ought to be blue, then I'm the only human that has that, and I truly am unique in that one regard.
No, so
but the second
you're
that somebody
coming down to
agrees
this.
with me,
Hold on.
then,
Hold on.
well, let me
Desire.
finish my thought so you can understand my whole concept.
I know you're. Go ahead and finish.
So if I am the only human on Earth, the only mind in existence that defines the sky as blue, then I am truly unique in that one singular regard. But the moment that I get other people to do the same thing, they have had that thought as well. Uniqueness is only a product in a
You're
snapshot
focusing
of time.
on thoughts.
Yeah.
No, I'm using it as a metaphor. I'm talking about anything. Everything will happen given enough time.
That doesn't matter for everything.
Yes,
doesn't
because then it's not unique.
fact that hold on, man. Let me finish, man. That doesn't negate the fact that if two people saw the exact same thing, they might have a different opinion or a different
I
thought
never said
about it.
anything about that. That's not the question.
That is the question, because what
No, it's
you're
not.
trying to do is you're trying to boil it down to some quote unquote truth claim about like, oh, if the sky's blue, if I tell that to somebody ever, then it's no longer original thought. Who fucking cares? Like we know about, and for me to know about gravity doesn't make original. When I hear or see a movie, to say that people don't have original thoughts, that's absurdity to the highest degree. Of course people experience things that nobody else experiences.
I mean, look at dreams. Look no further than dreams.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing. It's this fundamental contradiction, but people are so caught up in uniqueness or whatever and speciality, and makes them, I don't know, something out of the fucking Fight Club or something. You know, that kind of mentality that Chuck was like going for a specific story that doesn't mean anything. Like we are at the same time completely unique and completely the same.
Yeah, so we are the same species, or let's call it even subspecies of ape. But I mean, within that species, I'm saying all of us, and including all chimps, all gorillas, all turtles, they are all. I'm talking about at the fine-tuned level, are all unique. Like if you take a slice of time and call that,
so we can't use statistics to get a set model of how things work on a grand scale.
That's not what we said.
No, you're see. I mean, you're. It seems like you're confusing two different ideas. This idea, understanding that everything like do I have this? No, I don't. So we're definitely unique.
Yeah, Scott.
But
Scott, you're in and out.
I was going to say, so the idea that you and I have different DNA, that makes it so we are unique from each other. Now, the fact that we both look at the sky and according to our language, we call that blue. Yeah, of course we see that same thing. That doesn't negate the fact that we are at the same time unique from each other.
I mean, to get back to what I was saying, the way I look at it, maybe this is the wrong way to approach this.
There are things that are different than each other, but that does not make you unique. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, yeah, that's pretty much what I was getting at. And
no, it's not. Unique is individually, singularly different from everything that connects you to the other thing. Unique is different substantially from the others.
And substantially we are. Any kind of
white
neurological
guy with brown hair, brown
desire,
eyes that is on YouTube talking like
any two people
as a human. 98.99999% of what makes up you is not unique at all.
No,
exactly.
No.
But that 0.01% is, and that's the
okay. So what's that 0.01 thing? What is yours
desired.
That makes you unique to every other human?
Desired, like the genetics difference between us and a plant. Isn't that far?
No,
off?
I'm not talking about a plant. I'm talking about inside humanity.
I know, but I'm
How
saying,
are you
I'm saying
different
you're calling that fraction. Desired, just 2
version
seconds.
of-
Listen for a second. That tiny fraction that you're going, 99.9, that small fraction is an incredible amount of diversity.
Okay,
and difference.
name what that is for you. What is your unique thing that no other human existence has?
You, if you were to take a fMRI reading to the most detail that we possibly can of my brain right now, and then including reading the position or superposition of everything that's in my head, it's never been that way, and at any point in the history of mankind ever.
So is my skin.
Okay, but like, why?
And same with your skin, yeah. Oh, sorry, someone else was trying to get in there.
Yeah, like why do gay people exist then?
Well, Travis, to get back to what I was saying,
because they find that people of the same sex sexually pleasurable. What's your point?
This world needs better fashion.
Yeah.
To get back to what I was trying to say, though, I mean, let's take you and me, Travis. You and I would say, are relatively different people. I mean, you're clearly Caucasian. I'm African American. But we're both still human beings. We both, and the thing is that our tribalist nature dictates that we're always trying to find people who think alike.
Ah, but you can escape it.
Not always.
You can escape it, man.
I think you said that wrong. The backwards, Aaron. The human brain is always trying to find a difference in other people to set themselves apart, so that they know how to survive.
I don't think like this desire, that absolute rule just isn't absolute. It's you can make an observation and say,
well,
this
neither
is
is saying that the
case.
only thing people use is pleasure. You can't make that absolute statement either.
Well, maybe you should wait for my book to come out before we start talking about it. But I did give you guys some details today.
You can't not let other people say that this is an absolute, and then you use an absolute too, can you?
Well, I'm giving you
depends on what that absolute is.
Yeah, it depends on what the idea is, right? And it depends on like how it's demonstrated. And I've given some taste as to the mechanism I'm talking about and how I'm going to explain with metaphor of how I see a conductor conducting what's going on, because I see at some point the emergent qualities of the brain, the way the brain makes choice. It's got to sometimes make choices between one thing or another, and it inevitably through the senses makes a hierarchy.
So I had a question based on that. Do you think that religion could come out of an understanding of that without the filler of understanding the concepts of brain chemistry and hierarchy? Like, if I understand the way you're trying to describe it, then and be right, but I don't have the words that you have to fill in with the conductor. Like back before conductors existed, you wouldn't have that idea of the one leading the guy in front and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between yours and God?
Yeah. So the difference is we now understand like neurological activity, so I can tie the metaphor to actual facts of neurology where they didn't have that option. Unfortunately, the people who wrote, let's say, the Bible, they didn't have the option of looking at of operating on the shoulders of giants in neurology and being able to take these concepts and try to put them together to create a theory of life, the fundamental theory of what's going on, this consciousness problem, right? And of course people have tried and have wrestled with this, but I think art is one of the fundamental things to understand the subjectivity of each individual system and why it's unique. And my theory, which is going to include the mathematical equation to demonstrate, is it actually combines the ought and the is of the brain, and why certain words emerge over the others, or certain answers where if someone says, if you don't have a favorite style of toque or whatever, and I ask you what your favorite style of toque is, whatever emerges out of your mind.
For clarification, what is a what is a toque?
What is a toque?
I like proud
It's the Canadian. It's the Canadian. What do you guys call it? A beanie?
A beanie.
Oh, I was thinking it was. I was thinking it was a thong.
I thought it was a Hobbit family.
Yeah, you guys don't say toque. I forget. Hey, how's that toque over there, eh?
It's pretty good. I got a 4-footer.
Yeah, I got a 4-foot toque over here, eh?
We call it a.
What is this degenerate non-American speech I hear?
We call it a Tim Pool down here in America.
I'll tell you, I speak American. I don't like this. I don't like what I'm hearing here.
Well, up here in Canada, we hear Americans talking with this drawl, even if they're from Chicago. It's this laid back drawl, and we're like, You know, up there in Canada,
Why
what
do you
do
guys
they
call
live
us all
in?
uptight if we talk all
Oh,
like
really?
that?
Because you also got people like, oh, sure, yeah.
Oh, shit, bud. Oh, shit, bud.
from Wisconsin.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say Minnesotans have a draw.
Minnesota. No, once you start going more north towards our border, I think we've infected you with our strange
Dude, you know what,
accent.
you know what Minnesotans sound like?
Minnesota.
You're two Swedish guys. Minnesotans
It
sound
does,
like
yeah.
two Swedish guys from fucking.
Dursky. Yeah.
Well,
totally.
Travis, I didn't hear the first part of your response because for some reason,
God didn't want you
Discord
to.
just decided to. And I'm about to lose my connection pretty bad, so I'd like to hear the first part of your response to my overly long statement again, if you don't mind.
Actually, maybe just like watch it back because this will be on YouTube like right away. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, but what are we at now? I think we're deep into this, aren't we? What are we? Yeah,
2 hours.
2:15. Yeah. So I think we'll end it there. But feel free to stay in the room, guys. But I'll end the YouTube live stream there. But thanks, Desired, Scott, all you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
For having us over. This was awesome. We'll fire up. I don't think Zombie's on tomorrow because she's busy. So Friday might be off. I might jump on for an AMA or something. But definitely we will be with Deniability on Saturday. I think he's at 1. Scott, did you see what time that was? I'll just look up at the schedule here.
That's the marijuana.
I think it was 1.
And we're talking about weed, guys.
Smoke fucking weed, yeah.
I just got back from the shop.
Nice. Yeah, I just actually got my Blue Dream in. Yes.
Is that what you get every time? Is that your normal?
Yeah, that's my normal go-to.
Blue Dream.
Mine that I found is the South African KwaZulu. I'm a sativa user.
See, what I do is every time I go in, I look up at the board. I'm like, what's got the highest THC?
You know what I just found out? My place that I go to tiers their prices based on availability.
Oh yeah.
So if you've got a tiered place, make sure that it's not tiered by quality of flower, because it may be your favorite one and it may be on tier 3 this week and be cheaper, and then next week because they have less flower, they'll put on tier 1.
Oh yeah.
Just a public service announcement.
Yeah.
Don't look at the tier 3s because you think it's lower quality.
That's the thing. I
just because they have more mass of it.
When I never buy one particular type.
Sometimes.
Like I'll just buy, hey, I've got $150. Get me the most potent ounce you got for $150, and that's makes it easy.
Yeah, totally. So we're talking.
It's nice that we can actually trust it now.
We're talking cannabis at 12 p.m. Pacific time Saturday. That'll be a great conversation. I hope you join up.
Yeah.
I'm probably definitely going to have a few puffs before that. So I'll probably be laughing at every single syllable anyone else says. So I apologize ahead of time if you come in to talk about some kind of if you come in to talk about some deep psychological issue you've been wrestling with through COVID-19. I'm probably going to laugh at every single thing you say, and I'm sorry for that. It's just what happens when I get on the.
Do you think we can? Do you think we could get away with playing 5 during the podcast?
Say that again. Say that again.
Playing, I got 5 on it from knees.
Oh, I got high.
I got 5 on it.
Yeah. Oh wait,
I was gonna clean my room,
and then
that's it's I got 5 on it.
For some reason,
smoking into weed.
Do you know what I thought of for some reason when you said that song? I thought of you got what I need. And they say he's just a friend. They say
so
he's just a friend. Oh, baby, you.
You can't sing that
Cool
song good.
Modine.
I know you have to sing it bad. Seriously, everyone, here's my laugh factor thing for the day. Go and watch that music video. It is fucking hilarious. That music
that's
video
the thing. He sings it bad in that video too. It's like
just the look on his face.
It's on
I love
purpose.
it. They definitely just shot that in about 4 hours. That music video.
Dude, well, if you look back at any of the any like hip hop music videos from that, all look somebody shoulder camcorder basketball court. Or like, you know, and that was the whole fucking episode.
Yeah. All right, dudes. Thanks. Thanks, Discord peeps.
Thanks, Travis. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Desire. Thanks, Scott. Metal. Dal.
Have a good night, man.
Greasy Italian. I don't think he said
Guido,
Greasy Italian meatball.
All right, dudes. Thanks for tuning in. Those of you who came by on YouTube. I see YouTube didn't show our live stream again to very many of our subscribers, but anyways, leave a like if you do stop by. Subscribe. Drop a comment. Try to mess with the YouTube algorithm a little bit. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll be chatting cannabis this Saturday. Pangburn out. Let art and science inspire.